I luckily never had this teacher, but I've heard many stories from classmates who have. This teacher, let us call him Mr. Harvey for privacy purposes, would take pictures on his phone of students who fell asleep in class. His reasoning for this is, I send them to their parents so they'll get in trouble for sleeping in my class. No parent has ever received such an image. I can only imagine what he does with them. When Mr. Harvey went around the classroom to help students with their work, he would place his hand on their shoulder and ask, "What seems to be the problem, sweetheart?" in what he thought was a sort of fatherly, wizened tone, but came off as rapey. However, the hand would not leave the shoulder once he had asked what was up. The hand remained there for the entire time he stayed and explained the work, and some accounts have included rubbing of the back. Worst of all, though, and I just learned of this today, he offers extra credit to any student willing to accompany him on a sailing trip. I don't know if he was serious about this or just saying it in jest, but in any case, Mr. Harvey is a creeper. This is a true story that happened to me. One day while coming home from school on the bus, we noticed a guy walking down the road, which happened to be the main highway before they put in the freeway. I guess he must have seen me get off the bus, because a few minutes after I got home, he came to the door and asked to use my phone because he had a flat tire. I put the phone out on the porch using its really long cord and shut the door. A few minutes later, while I was making ramen in the kitchen, he walked up behind me. I felt a little bit of pressure on my back and he said, "I have a knife at your back and you are going to do what I say." Now, being the teen I wasn't going to put up with that nonsense. I put my hand behind my back to see what he had, and it was his finger. I told him, "That isn't a knife, that's your finger." Then I started yelling at him. He got mad, and while turning around to leave, said, "You're just a whore. You invite me into your house and tell me to leave." It was something along those lines. I was too scared and ticked off to remember exactly what he said. The next day at school, I do believe the creeper was my substitute teacher. I still get chills down my spine whenever I think about my English teacher, Miss Smith. She was known for being strict and always carrying a cold, unapproachable demeanor. But for me, it wasn't just her strictness that made her creepy. It was something much darker. It all started when she assigned us a creative writing project. We were supposed to write a horror story, and I decided to push the boundaries and write about a demonic possession. Little did I know, my fictional story would become a reality. One day, while I was working on my project in class, Miss Smith approached me and whispered in a low, nearly demonic voice, "I see you've been delving into the realm of the unknown." I froze, not knowing how to respond. Then she leaned closer, and her eyes seemed to glaze over as she continued, "You should be careful, my dear. Demons are not to be trifled with. They can sense those who are curious, and they will not hesitate to make their presence known." I was creeped out, to say the least, but brushed it off as her trying to scare me. But as the days went by, strange things started happening to me. I would wake up with scratches on my arms and hear whispers at night. I also noticed that Miss Smith would always be watching me intently, almost as if she was waiting for something to happen. Then, during a parent-teacher conference, my mom mentioned that she had seen Miss Smith talking to herself in the hallway, and it seemed like she was having a heated argument with someone. That's when I knew that my horror story had come to life. I could feel an evil presence around me, and knew that Miss Smith was connected to it somehow. I was terrified and couldn't wait to finish the project and get away from her. But even after the project was over, I could still feel her watching me, and I swear I could see a sinister smile on her face whenever I passed by her in the hallway. I was glad when the school year ended, and I never had to see Miss Smith again. But to this day, I wonder if my story somehow beckoned a dark force into our classroom. In high school, I had a math teacher, Mr. Johnson, who was infamous for being moody and unpredictable. One day, he would be friendly and engaging, and the next, he would snap at the smallest thing and send students to the principal's office for no reason. But what frightened me the most about him was the way he would stare at us with his deep-set, dark eyes. It was like he was looking straight into our souls, and it sent shivers down my spine. One day, while I was running late for Mr. Johnson's class, I took a shortcut through the school's back hallways. That's when I saw him, standing in one of the dark corners, whispering to himself and swaying back and forth. I froze, not wanting to be caught by him, but also curious about what he was doing. It was like he was in a trance, and I could hear him mumbling something in a different language. I quickly made my way to class, trying to brush it off as he practiced a new lesson. But from that day on, I could always feel Mr. Johnson's eyes on me, and I noticed that he paid extra attention to me during class. He would call on me for every question, even if I didn't raise my hand, and would give me a sinister smile whenever I got answers wrong. It was like he was trying to intimidate me, and it worked. But the creepiest encounter I had with Mr. Johnson was when he handed back our graded tests, and as he gave mine back to me, he whispered, "You should be careful, my dear. You have a mark on your soul that is quite intriguing." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was he really talking about my soul? And how did he know about it? I tried to brush it off, but from that day on, I was always uneasy around him, and I made sure to never take a shortcut through those back hallways again. My high school art teacher, Mrs. Thompson, was known for being eccentric. She would often wear long, flowy dresses and large, colorful jewelry. Some students would joke that she was a witch, and I laughed it off as just a silly rumor. But one day, she proved them right. It was Halloween, and Mrs. Thompson had decided to do a special art lesson, creating voodoo dolls. I was excited to try something new, but as I looked around the classroom, I noticed that the dolls Mrs. Thompson had handed out to us were eerily lifelike. And what was even stranger was that each doll resembled one of the students in the class. I quickly brushed it off and started working on my doll, but then I saw Mrs. Thompson whispering something over a cauldron in the corner of the room. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but it sounded like an incantation. My nerves were already on edge when I heard Mrs. Thompson say, "Now, focus all your energy on your doll and repeat after me." We all repeated her, not knowing what we were doing. But then, as I looked down at my voodoo doll, I could swear I saw its eyes move and a malicious grin stretch across its face. I quickly threw the doll away, thinking it was just my imagination. But as the days went by, strange things started happening to the students who had participated in the voodoo doll lesson. One student claimed that she woke up with scratches all over her body, and another had unexplainable bruises. Even weirder was that Mrs. Thompson seemed to have a knowing smirk on her face whenever these incidents were brought up. It wasn't until a student found a voodoo doll with pins sticking out of it in Mrs. Thompson's classroom that we all realized how dangerous the art lesson had been. Needless to say, I never looked at Mrs. Thompson the same way again, and always made sure to steer clear of her art projects. When I was in year 11, sophomore, there used to be a rumor that there was a lady singing at the last stall of the girls' bathroom. Of course, me and my BFFs didn't believe it. It also said that if you go to the last stall of the girls' bathroom after 6:30 p.m., the singing lady will lock you in the stall and start screaming loudly, which will make your ears bleed. There was a school party which lasted till 11. I and my friends wanted to test out the rumor. My friend went to the last stall in the bathroom while we were dancing and stuff. After an hour, she wasn't back, so we went to check in on her. When we opened the stall door, my friend was on the floor, pale and petrified with ears bleeding. We went and called the teacher, and after a few days, she came back to school. When we tried to talk to her, she would keep repeating, "Miss Quinn was murdered by Mr. Smith." Mr. Smith was our math teacher. We were creeped out really badly. One day, I don't know what came over me, but I had extra classes which lasted till 8. I went to the last stall at around 7:30, and then I heard a melodious hum of a young lady. I tried to open the door, but it was locked. There was a window above the stall in which an average person could fit in. Then the hum started becoming a scream, a loud scream. My ears hurt. I broke the glass of the window and climbed out. While climbing out, I saw the young lady. Her face was pale with one of the ears plucked out, wearing a bloody, torn white gown. She stared at me and stopped the screaming. I was shocked and climbed out of the window. Luckily, the bathroom was on the second floor. I still remember it. Her face, her clothes, and her torn ear. I still remember the day I first visited Professor Harris during his office hours in my freshman year of college. As an eager student, I wanted to clear my doubts about the subject he taught and seek advice on how to excel in his class. But little did I know that this simple, innocent intention of mine would lead to a series of uncomfortable and unsettling encounters with the professor. It all started with a harmless question about the material we were studying, but as soon as I entered his office, his demeanor changed. He closed the door behind me and motioned for me to take a seat. I nervously sat down as he leaned on his desk, staring at me with an unsettling gaze. "So, tell me, do you have a boyfriend?" he asked, completely catching me off guard. I stuttered a response, taken aback by the personal question. Sensing my discomfort, he quickly changed the subject and began asking me more and more personal questions. With each passing minute, his probing questions became more and more inappropriate. "Have you ever been with a man?" he asked with a sly smile. I could feel my face burning with embarrassment and anger. I didn't know how to respond to such a question coming from an authority figure, someone I was supposed to look up to and learn from. But I didn't want to cause a scene or jeopardize my future, so I kept quiet and tried to steer the conversation back to the subject at hand. But no matter what I said, he always found a way to bring the conversation back to sex. This became a pattern every time I visited him during his office hours. Each time, I hoped that he would focus on my academic concerns, but instead, I left feeling disgusted, violated, and ashamed. I couldn't understand why this was happening to me and why this professor, who was well respected by his colleagues and students, was behaving in such a despicable manner. It wasn't until my roommate, who also had the same professor, confided in me about her own experiences with him that I finally realized I wasn't the only one. He had been targeting other girls in our class as well, using his position of power to manipulate and prey on young, vulnerable students. We decided to take action and report his behavior to the university. It was a tough decision, as we feared the consequences it would have on our grades and academic standing, but we knew it was the right thing to do. In the end, our actions led to his termination from the college and exposed the truth about his shameful conduct. It was a long and difficult process, but it brought a sense of justice and closure for all the girls who had been victims of his harassment. Looking back, I can't help but wonder how many other girls had been through similar experiences with him and stayed silent. It's a reminder that we must speak up and take a stand against those who abuse their power and prey on the vulnerable. And I am grateful that I had the courage to do so, even in the face of fear. As a student in university, I always had a knack for choosing the most eccentric professors and advisors. They were often brilliant but socially awkward, and I found myself drawn to their unique perspectives and ways of teaching. My professor was no exception. He was a middle-aged man with messy hair, thick-rimmed glasses, and a constant frown on his face. He was always deep in thought, scribbling away in his notebook or buried in books. But despite his odd quirks, he was highly respected in his field and known for his intellect. One day, I was going through a tough breakup, and it must have shown on my face. He noticed and asked me to come into his office for a talk. I accepted, grateful for the opportunity to confide in someone. However, what transpired in that conversation left me feeling even more confused and upset. Instead of offering words of comfort, my professor seemed to hint that I needed to figure out my sexuality. He spoke in a roundabout manner, almost as if he was trying to imply that I needed to decide if I was gay or not. It was odd and uncomfortable, but I brushed it off, assuming it was just his awkward way of trying to help. Years went by and I graduated, leaving university and that strange experience behind. I didn't think much of it until one day I stumbled upon a news article that left me reeling in shock. It turns out my professor had been arrested for some heinous crimes. The details were shocking: child pornography, sex with minor boys, and trafficking underage boys across state lines. My heart dropped to my stomach as I read on. He was also facing charges of child sexual abuse and exploitation. I couldn't believe it. The man whom I had once looked up to and sought guidance from was capable of such atrocities. I felt sickened and betrayed. But the story didn't end there. Months later, I came across another news article with a headline that left me numb. My professor advisor had been killed in prison. It was a brutal murder, and while no one deserved to die in such a way, I couldn't help but feel a sense of justice. He would never be able to harm another innocent child again. As I reflected on the past, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a sense of naivety. How could I have been so blind? How many others had trusted and confided in him, unaware of his true intentions? I learned a valuable lesson that day. Things are not always as they seem. People can hide dark secrets behind a facade of academic success and intelligence. And while it may not bring back his victims or erase the trauma they endured, I found some solace in knowing that justice had been served.